The morning they left, my mother stood in the front hall checking the side pocket of her suitcase for her passport 3 separate times, and not once did she look up the stairs at me. I remember the sound of the rolling bag on the tile, the little catch it made over the threshold strip, and the way the cold came in through the open door even though she only had it open for a few seconds. It was the second week of January, the kind of Winnipeg morning where the snow squeaks under your boots and the inside of your nose freezes the moment you step out. I was standing at the top of the stairs in my sock feet, and I watched my parents leave for the Dominican the way you watch a bus pull away when you already know you've missed it. My mother's name was Charlene, and she had spent the whole previous week talking about the resort like it was a thing she'd earned. All inclusive, she kept saying, the way other people say finally. My father, Curtis, didn't say much. He never did. He moved through our house the way you move through a room that belongs to someone else. Careful, quiet, like he was a guest who'd been there long enough that nobody bothered to ask him to leave. He carried the bags to the cab and came back in once, just to grab his coffee off the counter, and on his way out, he said, "Be good, kiddo." And that was the entire conversation we had about the fact that he was leaving his 11-year-old daughter alone for a month in the dead of winter. Before she went, my mother set two things on the kitchen counter: a $20 bill, folded once, and a prepaid Visa card, still in the little cardboard sleeve from the drugstore. 20 for the month, she said, and she said it lightly, like she was telling me where the spare key was. The card's for emergencies, there's money on it. Don't be silly with it. Then she clipped her sunglasses onto the neck of her shirt, sunglasses in January in Manitoba, and she was gone. And the storm door pulled itself shut on its slow hydraulic arm, and the lock turned over, and I was alone in the house. I waited at the front window. You wait after something like that. You wait the way you wait at the bottom of the stairs after you hear a noise in the night. Just to be sure, just in case the explanation is going to come walking back through the door and make it all make sense. I watched the cab back out of the driveway, watched the exhaust hang in the air the way it does when it's that cold, and I counted to 100, and then I counted to 100 again, and they didn't come back. We lived in a split level in the south end of the city, on a curved street where every house looked like ours with a different door color. My mother kept a place looking nice for a very specific reason, which was that she ran a little Facebook page and a smaller Instagram where she posted photos of our living room and her charcuterie boards and captions about gratitude and slowing down and being present. She had something like 4,000 followers, which she mentioned often, and she would rearrange the throw pillows for 20 minutes to get a picture of a room nobody actually sat in. If you scrolled back far enough on that account, you'd find photos of me when I was little, 2 or 3, chubby and useful for the look she was going for. By the time I was 8 or 9, I'd been quietly phased out. She told people I was shy about the camera. I'd learned a long time ago not to argue with the version of me that lived in her head. My father worked for the city, something to do with water and sewer contracts, and he worked long hours and came home gray in the face and ate whatever was in front of him and went to bed. He wasn't cruel. I want to be clear about that because people always assume there was hitting, and there wasn't. He was just gone in a way that had nothing to do with whether his body was in the room. I'd been making my own breakfast since I was 7. I packed my own lunches. I signed my own permission slips with a careful imitation of my mother's signature because she got irritated when I asked her to do it. She used to tell company that I was so independent, so mature for my age, and she said it the way you'd brag about a houseplant that didn't need much water. I thought that was normal. I genuinely did. I thought every kid learned early to fold themselves up small and be grateful for whatever attention came their way instead of expecting any. It was about 3 days in when I figured out the card didn't work. I'd been careful with the 20. I'm a planner, I always have been, and I think part of me knew even then that $20 in a month don't fit together no matter how you turn them. But I figured the card was the real money. That's what she'd said. There's money on it. So on day 3, I walked down to the Sobeys on the corner with the prepaid Visa in my mitten and a small grocery list in my head, and I got to the till with a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and a couple of cans of soup. And the cashier swiped the card and frowned and swiped it again and turned the little machine toward me. Card not activated. I remember the heat in my face. There was a woman behind me with a full cart, and I could feel her not quite looking at me, and I said something like, "Oh, sorry." And I put the soup back and I put the peanut butter back and I bought the loaf of bread with $3 of my 20, and I walked home in the cold doing math in my head. $17. 27 days left. I was 11 and I worked out that I had about 63 cents a day to live on, and I rounded it up to a number that felt survivable. And I didn't cry because crying didn't change the number. I went to the No Frills 2 bus stops over the next morning because everything there was cheaper, and I stood in the aisle with the dry goods and I bought the things that stretch. Kraft dinner because it was $1 a box on sale and it filled you up. A case of Mr. Noodles, the chicken kind, because you could eat half a packet and feel like you'd eaten more bread. A big jar of the store brand peanut butter. I carried it all home in 2 bags that cut red lines into my fingers through my mittens, and I lined it up in the cupboard like I was rationing for a siege, which I suppose I was. I figured out a system. Half a packet of noodles in the morning, dry-ish with not enough water. The other half at night. Peanut butter on bread for the middle of the day when the hunger got loud. I drank a lot of water because water made my stomach think something was happening. The furnace I kept turned down low, partly because I was scared of the gas bill arriving with nobody home to pay it, and partly because I'd half convinced myself that if I used less of everything, the month would somehow cost less and that would make it shorter. I wore 2 sweaters in the house. I slept in my coat some nights. I told myself it was an adventure for the first few days, the way you tell yourself things to keep your own face from crumpling when there's no one there to see it crumple. On day 5, I called her. I'd been holding off because I knew, somewhere, how it would go, but the bread was getting low and the math was getting worse, and I was scared, just plain scared, in a way I didn't have the words for yet. I called the cell number she'd written on the fridge whiteboard, and it rang a long time, and when she picked up I could hear music behind her, something with steel drums and people laughing and the clink of glasses. "Mom," I said, "the card doesn't work. I don't have money for food." She did the breath. She had a particular long breath. She let out through her nose right before she made you feel like the problem was you. "You're being dramatic," she said. $20 is plenty if you're not wasteful, honestly. And then somebody said something to her on her end and she laughed, a real laugh, and she said, "I have to go." And she was gone. That night, I went on her Instagram from the old tablet I kept in my desk drawer. There was a new post, my mother at a table by the water, candles, a glass of white wine catching the light, a plate of something small and pretty in front of her. La Dulce Vita, the caption said, which I had to look up. The sweet life. I sat on my bed in 2 sweaters with the heat turned down, and I read that caption maybe 10 times. I don't know exactly why I started recording. I think I just needed somewhere to put it, the way some kids keep a diary. I propped the tablet against my pillow and I pressed record and I said, "Today is day 5. My mom posted from a restaurant tonight. I had half a packet of Mr. Noodles." My voice came out steadier than I felt. I said the date. I held up the cupboard so you could see what was left. Then I stopped recording and I lay there in the dark, and for some reason that small thing, saying it out loud to a camera, putting it somewhere real, made the night a little easier to get through. The man next door noticed before any adult who was supposed to be watching me did. His name was Mr. Doucette and he was 70-something and he'd lived in the yellow bungalow beside us since before my parents bought our place. He walked with a cane in winter because of his hip, and he had a fat orange cat that sat in his front window judging the whole street. He'd shoveled our walk a couple of times over the years without being asked, the way some old men do, just because the snow offended him. On day 7, he must have clocked that nobody had cleared our driveway and nobody had taken in the recycling, and the only lights on in the evening were the one over the kitchen sink that I left on so the house didn't feel so empty. He knocked. A careful knock. The knock of a man who already half knows the answer to the question he's about to ask. I opened the door with the chain on first, which I'd started doing, and when I saw it was him, I let it off. He looked at me for a second longer than felt comfortable. I knew I looked bad. My lips were chapped and cracking, my skin had gone a gray-yellow color. I hadn't really slept a full night in a week. And he was looking at me the way you look at something you already understand. "I made too much soup," he said. "Far too much. You'd be doing me a favor." We both knew there was no extra soup. We both knew he'd go in and make it. But he gave me a way to say yes that didn't require me to admit anything, and I took it because I was too tired and too hungry to build a lie or hold up my pride. I sat at his kitchen table that night under a light that was too bright, and I ate 2 bowls of barley soup and most of a sleeve of soda crackers, and I told him the truth. All of it. The card, the $20, the phone call, the resort. I think I told him because I was so depleted that the truth was the only thing left that didn't cost energy to maintain. He listened the whole way through without interrupting once. His hands folded on the table, the orange cat winding around his ankles. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm not going to phone anyone tonight because the minute I do, this leaves your hands and goes into a system. And I want you walking into that with both feet under you, not getting swept up in it." He tapped the table once. "But I'm going to bring you something to eat every day, and I want you to keep doing whatever it was you said you've been doing on that tablet. Write it down. Dates, times. Take pictures. Keep the receipts." He looked at me very steadily. "I've lived a long time, kiddo. I'll tell you the one thing I know for certain. People don't believe a child. They believe a record. So I built a record. I'd already been doing the program at the community center 2 mornings a week, a winter break enrichment thing, math and science, that my mother had signed me up for months earlier. Not because she cared about the coursework, but because it was free and it took me off her hands. I kept going to it because going somewhere warm with other people in it was better than the house. And it was there. On the second week that my body finally said enough, we were doing some kind of group activity and the room went thin and bright and far away, and the next thing I knew I was lying on a cot in the little first aid room with a woman I didn't recognize crouched down looking at my face. She was one of the program coordinators. She had me sit up slow and she gave me juice from the staff fridge and she asked me, gently, when I'd last eaten a real meal. And then she asked where my parents were. I didn't have it in me to lie anymore. I told her they were away. She asked who was staying with me. I said no one. She didn't react big. She was good. She kept her voice flat and kind. But I saw her look over my head at the other coordinator, a woman named Ms. Bramwell, who I knew a little because she ran the reading group. The two of them exchanged a look I recognized even at 11. It was the look adults get when they've quietly decided something on your behalf. After everyone else had drifted out, Miss Bramwell crouched down to my level. She didn't ask me a single question. She just said, "I see you. I want you to know that I see what's going on, and it's not your fault, and we're going to make sure you're okay." I hadn't cried in 2 weeks. I didn't cry then either, but something in my chest came unknotted by maybe a quarter turn, and I had to look at the floor for a second. My mother called that night. I don't know how she found out so fast. The center must have made a call. Her voice on the phone was different than it had been on day 5, tighter. "I understand the program contacted somebody," she said. "What exactly did you tell them?" I said I hadn't told them anything, which was almost true. I'd answered questions. "You are embarrassing this family," she said, dropping into the low, careful voice she used when she wanted you to understand she was serious. "Do you hear me?" If you breathe one more word about this to anyone, a teacher, that old man next door, anyone, when I get home, you will not be living in this house. I will put you somewhere else. Do you understand me? I said yes. My hands were shaking when I hung up, and then I picked up the tablet and I pressed record and I said, in the plainest voice I could manage, exactly what had just happened. I said, the date. I repeated what she'd said as close to word for word as I could remember it. The part about not living in this house. I'd figured out by then that the calmer I sounded, the more it would be believed. Hysterical kids get dismissed. A kid stating facts into a camera with no expression on her face, that lands different. I documented everything after that. The inside of the fridge, which by week 3 held a single egg, some condiments, and a half-empty thing of margarine. The numbers on the bathroom scale, which I weighed myself on every couple of days, watching the number go down. The grocery receipts, dated, kept in a shoebox. The whiteboard with her cell number on it. I read her threatening phone call into the camera. I sat there at 11 years old, building the most boring, careful, ironclad case a kid has ever built, because an old man next door had told me the truth about who gets believed and who doesn't. The woman from Child and Family Services came on the 22nd day. Her name was Ms. Ferreira, and she had a quiet, unhurried way of moving through a space. She opened the fridge without being invited to, which I appreciated because it meant she already half knew. She looked in the cupboards. She looked at the thermostat turned down to 15. She crouched by the recycling and the garbage and looked at what was and wasn't in there. Then she turned to me and she said, "Is there anything you'd like to show me?" I brought her the tablet and the shoebox. She watched the videos all the way through, all of them, sitting at our kitchen table with her coat still on. She didn't say anything while she watched. When the last one ended, me, pale, holding the tablet at arm's length, saying today is day 15. There's one egg in the fridge. I have $4 left. My mom posted from a rooftop bar tonight. She sat for a moment with her hand flat on the table. Then she closed the cover of the tablet gently, like it mattered, and she said, "You did everything right, you know that? Everything." And then she asked me the question that no adult had ever asked me directly in my whole life, not once. "Do you want to be safe?" And I said yes, out loud. The first time I'd ever said it. What came together over the next couple of weeks was, in the words of the lawyer who eventually walked me through it, unambiguous. 22 videos with date stamps you couldn't fake, a medical assessment from the program that put numbers to it. I lost just under 9 pounds, a child that age, in 2.5 weeks. Financial records that came out later showed my parents had spent a little over $38,000 on that trip. The resort and the upgrades and the excursions and the spending money. And the prepaid card. This is the part I still come back to. The card hadn't just been forgotten. The records showed it had been purchased and then deliberately left unactivated. There was a difference between forgetting to load a card and buying one specifically so it would sit on a counter looking like help while being nothing at all. The second one is a decision. My mother had planned a welcome home party. I learned this afterward in pieces, but I've put it together enough that I can see it. They flew back on a Saturday. She'd arranged for friends to come by Sunday afternoon, close to 40 people, the lawyer said, when the guest texts were pulled, for a little gathering to show off the trip. There was a tray of catered sandwiches. There was a banner she'd ordered that said, "Welcome home," over the front window, which I think about more than I should, given that the home in question had a starving child in it. She'd set up the laptop hooked to the TV to run a slideshow of the vacation photos on a loop. The beach, the sunsets, the plate of something pretty by the water. I wasn't there. I was already at my aunt's by then, which I'll get to. But Ms. Bramwell told me later what people said, and the lawyer told me the rest, and so I can see it the way you see a thing you were at. The doorbell rang in the middle of the party. My mother opened it with a smile already on her face, expecting another friend with a bottle of wine. Miss Ferreira was standing on the front step. Behind her were 2 officers. Somebody in the living room said, "Oh," just the one syllable, and then nobody said anything, and the slideshow kept clicking through the beach photos because nobody had thought to stop it. My mother started to close the door. One of the officers said something quiet about a warrant. And here's the part that I didn't plan, that nobody planned, that I still can't fully believe happened the way it did. The slideshow on the TV reached the end of the vacation photos and looped, except it didn't loop back to the beach. Because at some point in all of this, the laptop had a different folder open, the one the investigators had been working from, and the screen changed, and there I was. 11 years old, gray-faced, holding the tablet at arm's length in a freezing house. "Today is day 15, my voice said, into a living room full of my mother's friends holding little plates. "There's one egg in the fridge." The room went completely silent. The lawyer said you could hear the furnace kick on. My mother turned to her guests and started talking fast. "It was a misunderstanding. I was a dramatic kid. I'd always had a flair for it. I exaggerated. I'd been a difficult child." Miss Ferreira didn't argue with her. She just opened the folder she was holding and read from it. No emotion in her voice at all. The way you read a grocery list. No caregiver had checked on the home in 30 days. The support card had been knowingly left inactive. The amount spent on the trip. The medical findings. She read it flat, in front of all of them, and not one person in that room moved to stand beside my mother. Not one. They put their little plates down and they looked at the floor, and the officers walked both my parents out past the Welcome Home banner. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, my Auntie Faye, had already filed for guardianship before the party even happened. She lived across the city in a 1.5-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner with mismatched dishes and a couch she'd bought secondhand with a knitted blanket thrown over the worn armrest. It was, hands down, the most comfortable place I have ever lived in my life. My parents took a plea, probation, a long list of community service hours, and a criminal record that follows them now. I know a lot of people who've heard this story think that was too soft, and some days I agree with them, and some days I've made a kind of peace with it. But I'll tell you the part that actually mattered to me. The part I'd been afraid to even hope for. At the same set of hearings, the family court judge terminated their parental rights. She read it out in a voice that had no drama in it at all, which somehow made it land harder. And she granted the guardianship to my aunt, who had been sitting in the second row in her good coat the entire time with her hand pressed flat against her chest. Auntie Faye came to my school things. She wrote them on the kitchen calendar in red pen: concerts, parent-teacher nights, the science fair, and she actually showed up to them, and I spent the first full year waiting for her patience to run out, because in my experience, adults had a meter and the meter always emptied. Hers didn't. She asked me follow-up questions at dinner. Do you know how strange it is the first time someone asks you a follow-up question? She'd ask how my day was, and then when I answered, she'd ask another thing about the thing I just said. Like the first answer wasn't the end of it, like there was more of me she wanted. It took me an embarrassingly long time to stop flinching at kindness. I'm 29 now. I work as a child protection worker for the same kind of agency that sent Ms. Ferreira to my door, which is either the most predictable thing in the world or the least, depending on how you look at it. Mr. Doucette passed away when I was 19. I went to the funeral and I told a room full of his actual family that he was the first adult who ever told me the truth about something that mattered, and I meant the part about how the world believes a record and not a child. And I've built a whole career on making sure the kids I work with get to have a record, get to be believed, get asked the question, "Do you want to be safe?" out loud, to their face, by someone who'll actually do something about the answer. A couple of letters came over the years, forwarded through the agency, from my mother. She says she's been in therapy. She says she understands now what she did, and that she's proud of who I've become. And then, to her credit, she adds that she knows she has no right to be. I read both of them all the way through. I put them back in the envelopes. I haven't written back, and I genuinely don't know if I ever will. And the thing that took me the longest to understand, years, honestly, is that I'm allowed to leave that question open, that it's mine to leave open. Nobody gets to decide for me how fast I forgive or whether I do it all. She left me with a 20 and a card she knew was dead, and she bet that being small and quiet and grateful had been trained into me deep enough that I'd just sit there and starve politely and never say a word. Because saying a word was the one thing I'd been taught my whole life would cost more than the suffering. And for the first 11 years, she was right. She was right about all of it except the last month. I think about the people who've been made to believe their silence is the price of being allowed to stay in a family, in a marriage, in a friendship, in a job. That if you just don't say the thing, you get to keep belonging. I learned slow, and I learned it at a cost I'd never wish on anyone, that the silence was never protecting me. It was only ever protecting the person who needed me quiet. So if you've been carrying something you were told you'd lose everything for saying out loud, I'd like you to ask yourself who that arrangement was really built to protect. Because I can tell you from the cold end of one very long January that it was never, not once, going to be you. The cold that January didn't come from the furnace I'd turned down to 15. It came from understanding at 11 that the math had been done before anyone ever left. My mother bought a card she never meant to load. That wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting. Buying the thing that looks like help so it can sit on a counter doing nothing is a decision, and decisions have a shape you can trace back to who you are. She was a person who'd rehearsed turning a child into a prop and an inconvenience for years, and the empty cupboard was just the last frame of a film she'd been shooting since I was little. I want you to notice what actually saved me, because none of it was luck. Mr. Doucette could have phoned someone the first night and washed his hands of it. Instead, he sat me down and told me the truth. Grown men usually soften, that the world believes a record, not a child. And he had the steadiness to keep his word and bring food every single day without making me beg for it. That steadiness is something you build. The same way you build a callus. Nobody is born able to keep showing up. You practice it on small things until it holds under weight. And I want you to notice what I did with what he gave me. A frightened kid screams or hides. I'd had enough hardship beaten into me that I could sit very still and think clearly. Could work out that a calm voice on camera gets believed where a hysterical one gets dismissed, that dates and receipts in a steady hand are worth more than tears. That wasn't cleverness for its own sake. It was the kind of sharp, practical sense you only get from paying attention to how the world really works, instead of how you wish it did. What carried me the rest of the way was the part that doesn't show up in a folder. 22 days of rationing half a packet of Mr. Lear. Noodles, sleeping in my coat, weighing myself and watching the number fall and not quitting the record. The endurance to keep going when no one was coming. Charlene gambled that I had none of that. That small and quiet and grateful had been trained into me too deep to break. She was right for 11 years and wrong for 1 month, and the 1 month is the only part that mattered. So if you take anything from a girl who counted out 63 cents a day, take this. Be the kind of person who keeps their word the way Mr. Doucette kept his. Stay sharp enough to see the difference between an accident and a choice, and build the quiet endurance to hold on to the part where nobody's watching, because that's the part where everything is actually decided. Silence only ever protects the person who needs you. Quiet. It was never going to be you, and it was never going to be me.